Hello, and welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students brought to you by UJS. I'm Guy, head of campaigns at UJS, and to mark Sephardi and Mizrahi Heritage Month, we're delighted to have Edwin Shuker join us on today's episode. Edwin is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and is currently vice president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Edwin, like my grandparents, grew up in Baghdad before coming to the UK as a refugee in 1971. Edwin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Can I start off by asking a bit about your life growing up in Baghdad? What was life like in Baghdad?
I lived in Baghdad 16 years plus. The first 8 years were paradise, and the last 8 years, hell. So which one do you want me to start with?
Let's start with the paradise and we'll go on to hell.
So the community, the Iraqi community, is very unique, not just within the Jewish communities of the world, but in any community. Why is it unique? I arrived to that place, to Mesopotamia, to the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, 2,607 years ago. They arrived in 586 before Common Era as captives for the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And there they sat. They didn't move. 2,600 years. And in 1951, after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, there was I don't know how you call it, whether you call it conspiracy or whether you call it displacement, but throughout the Arab world, there was about 1,856,000 in the Arab countries, and the rest in Iran and Turkey. And in 1951, the vast majority of the Jews who live in Arab countries were displaced. We're talking about over 650,000, which doubled the state of Israel's population. But it also meant that people like my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncles they left with almost nothing. They were pushed out. So a man was allowed 3 suits, a woman 4 dresses, 1 single ring, 4 books, and so on and so forth. And so they emptied all these incredible, what I said to you before, the uniqueness as well, is this is not a nomad community that moved around, that went to Sfarad or to Turkey. No, this is where they stayed. And this was their tradition. And in 1951, what is remarkable is that they came in as, in a way, created the Judaism we know today in Babylon. And they went back after 2,600. They came in as a community, went back as a community after all that time, while preserving their identity.
So why did your parents stay in Iraq in 1951?
Perfect. My father alone stayed. He was finishing university, was studying law, and he didn't register. Absolutely everybody else in that family are gone. My mother, all her brothers, all her aunts, everybody's gone. And the idea was my father will follow within 2-3 months. Once we graduate, my mother would do the same. And what happened was that when Israel doubled its size, it wasn't ready for that sort of migration. So people like my grandfather and grandmother were put in ma'abarot, in tents, in refugee camps, rationing. It was very hot where they stayed in the summer and very cold in the winter. They were in aluminium type of structures. So the message went back, don't rush, guys. Take it easy. And so take it easy. My father started working. And then after a year of that, said, you know what? I'm single. I'm by myself. And he got married to my mom. I was born, and then suddenly that last 8,000 people who were meant to go and join found it. You know what? It's not so bad after all. Life was good. The young King Faisal was there. The British were running the show. There was a parliament, and the Jew was at his peak.
Okay. Life was good. Tell me about the first 8 years of your life, the paradise, the first 8 years.
So here I was born. I had no idea about what happened to the 90+% who were displaced, who because the word Israel was not mentioned almost ever, because that means spies, that meant fifth column, so we don't mention. So I had no idea that I had a huge family waiting for me. And so Jews were in control of many of the professions, of course, pharmacy, doctors, judges, and therefore we had servants and butlers, and Baghdad was beautiful. It's just really beautiful at that time. Leading city, wealth of the oil, beautiful American cars, Cadillacs and Chevrolet, and wide streets and lovely hotels, and so we lived in a bubble, and we had a fantastic school called Franchini, and most of us went to that, almost 90+%. In that school, we learned in 4 languages simultaneously. In that school, we achieved top marks. We were being prepared by the teachers and the headmaster for future in abroad, for universities, mainly in the UK, but some went to Canada, some went to America. So what's not to like? I remember the swimming in the Tigris in the morning, 5:30 in the morning before it gets hot. All the kids come in and we get thrown into the river, and the school, social life, Abu Nawas on the river. And then in 1963, the Ba'ath Party came in a coup, military coup. They came over, and the first thing they did was saying, every Jew, no matter how old he is, who isn't in the country, bring in your Iraqi ID, and you come to the place of nationality, and you queue there. And I remember 2-3 days maybe, we went queued in the heat of Baghdad in August until our turn came, and they took away our Iraqi nationality and gave us another one, a yellow ID, just for the Jew. And so our life just turned upside down within an instant. Suddenly we were marked people. Suddenly we were not fully citizens, and we were just second class, third class, call it what you want.
What was it like? What did you experience as a second or third class citizen?
Well, I was in 1963. I was only 8 years old, but I remember the humiliation of the swapping of these till today, the screaming on us, the shouting, the humiliation. They just abused us, really. They took our passports as well, so we couldn't leave. And I remember, like, when we get stopped for a traffic offense or parking, and they would ask for the ID. And I remember that my father would not feel comfortable. Suddenly a yellow document comes out, and they look at us differently. And as we reached close to the 1967 war, things got very, very bad, very hot, very anti-Semitic, very suffocating. One of the memories I had, which I talk about it quite a bit, was I remember going to the shower once and trying to wash my Judaism away. I just felt, why? Why are we being picked on? What have we done? And came to the conclusion that the only thing we've done is we are Jews. And I wanted to be like normal people, normal children. And I wanted to wash my Judaism away.
Did life get progressively worse throughout the 1960s and 70s?
Definitely. So in 1968, that is after the 67 war, Saddam Hussein came to power. Second time the Ba'ath Party came. And part of the reason why he mentioned that they needed to come back and was to get rid of the spies and the fifth column that actually caused the war caused Israel to win the war in 1967. So it wasn't the fault of the great Iraqi army. It's just we have spies inside and we're going to uproot them. And January 27th, 1969, we got dressed, ready to go to school with my sisters. And then suddenly there was an announcement that today there was a holiday. School's out. There was no schools, no businesses, no banks, just a day of rejoice. And sweet, please, guys, switch on the radio at 9 o'clock. You will have the reason why we have this national holiday. And at 9 o'clock came out the announcement that a spy ring was caught, that the perpetrators confessed, that there was a trial, and they were found guilty, and they were sentenced to death by hanging, 14 of them. And that hanging took place that morning. However, the bodies were now going to be displayed in the two public squares of Baghdad and Basra, and 10 of those 14 were Jews. And of course, as the names were read in a loud voice, one by one, we will recognize the father of your best friend, the partner of your father, and every name that was shouted, my mother would hysterically scream, and we were just so petrified. And probably looking back, that was probably the lowest point in the history of Iraqi Jews in that place. And just standing there, hearing name after name after name, and then watching online, I meant on television, live TV, the whole day, these bodies were swinging in the gallows with only one word in the front, Jew. And then at the back, the full name and the address.
You came to the UK in 1971, is that right?
Well, we had to leave because that hanging and killing and torture carried on. And eventually 1971 came, and my father, like other members of the community, found a way to escape. And that way was via the north of Iraq, via the Kurdish enclave. And my father was given a playing card, cut in half. Half of it came with us, and the other half was waiting so that the Kurds know that this is a bona fide Jewish family, matching the card, matching the date, and therefore they helped us and assist us massively at a huge cost for them, personal risk, to cross the border into Iran, dropped us there, and from there we were picked up by the Jewish agency, by the friendly Iranian regime at the time, and were given refugee papers, and we arrived to London as refugees, and we were granted asylum.
What was it like coming to the UK as a refugee?
Like every refugee the world over, a different language, different tradition, looked down by the population, rags, dressed up as Iraqis in the middle of London. I had probably memories of one day a year where it rains. And I think that year it rained every single day from the day I arrived in September till April, every day. And just a culture shock and trying to, you feel like you're an outsider barging on a party, whether you are in school, whether you are college, you're studying A levels, and it's a difficult feeling that I learned as I grew older and as I became in the board of deputies and dealt with refugees. I learned that this is an eternal issue that every refugee and expects it from the locals.
What lessons do you think we can learn from your experience as a refugee?
The lessons are huge. The lessons are the way I look at a refugee is not the way a local even today look at a refugee. So a local look at him and say, well, he's taking my job. I'm paying for his residence, I'm paying for his education. And I see it in a different way. I see myself being there. I see myself with a beautiful home, with a beautiful family, all shattered, all running for my life with nothing, and being grateful every day for the goodness and hospitality of this country. And I, for example, my father made us never to claim any benefits, because the biggest benefit they gave us is a freedom to live. But that's how I see when I see a refugee. That's how I see him. I see him somebody like me who had a life, who didn't come here to sponge, but it came here to actually just sit to live.
So when you got to the UK, did you go and study somewhere at university?
Yeah, I did A levels in Hendon, and then I went to Leeds University.
What was Leeds like?
Which one? The university?
University.
So I had an experience because my course, which I didn't know a single person, and my course started the day after Yom Kippur War. It was a Sunday, and I arrived there, and I saw all the Arab students basically celebrating and watching war videos and waiting for the moment that Israel is wiped off the map. And I was caught into that, and I was too afraid to say I was Jewish in the heat of the war and all that. So I sort of mumbled that I wasn't Jewish, and I wasn't a Muslim, that I was sort of a Christian, half, or all sorts of stories that I actually got got caught into it, and then I lived 3 years as a Christian Arab. And yeah.
Do you think there's anything that today's Jewish freshers can learn, having also started university at the same time as a big war erupted in Israel?
Yes. I wanted actually to tell you that in the Arab world as well, that every time Israel went into a war, there was a complete reaction, vicious reaction against the local Jewish community, even though they knew 100% that these people have been loyal to that country forever and for thousands of years. But it seems like a natural reaction that you are angry, you're frustrated, you hate war, you hate this one, and you think and you associate a Jew with Israel no matter what, and therefore, I can't get to Israel, but I can get to you. And I think the same thing is happening today. Again, aftermath of a war, a Jew is held responsible for all what I watch on television, and if somebody is killed, then you are responsible. And I feel today, after the 7th of October, I don't want to be a student, not in school, not in university, and I pray for your safety. I pray for your strength. We here, the Board of Deputies, there for you. If you need anything, the whole community is there for you, but you are on the front line, and it's not going to be easy ride.
What's the best way for us to fight that perception that British Jewish people are responsible for Israel's actions?
My way of fighting anti-Semitism is what I learned from Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, that Jews by themselves cannot fight anti-Semitism, that the victim cannot fight against the crime, that it has to be the society that breeds anti-Semitism has to be working with us jointly. And therefore, my whole thing, even at the board, is to strengthen interfaith with the Muslim community, with the Christian community, with the Hindus, throughout the time, not waiting for a crisis and then see how they respond, but actually, and also genuinely want to stand by them, because we are people of faith are tied up together, and therefore, if there's an attack on any faith, be sure that it will be your faith coming back next. And so, and therefore, I made sure, and I feel very comfortable today with a huge network of people who actually called me, and I hear differently from others, but almost all the people that I trust and I worked with and I fought with and I stood by, almost all of them called and said, "We're here for you, Edwin. You know, we feel what's happening and we're here for you." So that's my. If you want me to tell you a tip, this is my tip. My tip is to actually, when time is good, is to invite them. My Shabbat table is always open for all religions and all faiths, and therefore once you share bread and once you share a coffee together, it's a completely different thing. And I look at you as a person, I look at you as Guy, and I don't look at you as a Jew representing Israel.
So why did you get involved in the Jewish community in the UK?
It's a payback, really. I felt that I was given everything that I can dream of, every opportunity by the Jewish community and by the wider British society and by the authorities. And I always mentioned that my father was a lawyer. But when he came here, he didn't have the language to be a lawyer, but he worked in Petticoat Lane and worked 6 days a week, got up at 5 in the morning, but he sent me to university. And I worked just as hard, and I sent my son to Cambridge. And I felt this is the Jewish way of dealing with exiles and dealing with migrations and immigrations ever since we arrived to Babylon 2,600 years ago, and ever since the prophet Yirmiyahu, watching people saying, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept for Zion, and said, what we were weeping for? Get up, go and get gardens and grow trees, get your kids married, and the most important thing, say, pray for the peace and prosperity of wherever you get exiled. For in the peace of that place, you will find your own peace. And I think that every Jewish migration, whether it's to America, or whether to Europe, or whether to the East, have kept that promise and were loyal to that country that they were born in. And therefore, I wanted to pay back, and I thought giving a service through the Board of Deputies was a way of saying, "Oh, this is my 6th year as a vice president, and I feel very blessed."
What's one thing you want people to know about the Sephardi and Mizrahi Jewish community in the UK? Is obviously we're a very small community,
Yeah.
but I think it's small but mighty.
Well, first of all, I salute the Board of Deputies for taking. I salute the Board of Deputies for commissioning an inquiry on diversity and on inclusivity, which tackled Jews of color, Black Jews, Indian Jews, and Mizrahi Jews, and Sephardi Jews. And it came out with 119 recommendations. It was chaired by, very ably by Stephen Bush, who himself is a Black Jew. And if you want me to say one thing about it, I think you should read that report. You should read, because it's a very welcoming community. It's a very welcoming society. However, I think that there is much to do for our children to grow up, to go to school, to go to clubs, and live full life as honest to their own roots and to their own parents' roots, other than to choose either to become part of the mainstream Ashkenazi Jewry or leave Judaism, as the choice was when I arrived. Now the choices are much bigger, much more, but there's still things to be done. And I'm surprised that when I go to schools and Jewish schools and speak, I'm surprised that our story is not part of the curriculum, our history is not known. But inevitably, I will never forget, I was in one of the main schools, and I spoke about the history of our people in Iraq and in Syria. And a young girl came to me. She looked like 9, but I think she was 12 or 13. And with tears in her eyes, she said, "Sir, I am Iraqi from both sides, my mother and my father, but I never said that, because every time I they're asking me, and I think Iraq is always about bombs and wars and things like that. And I'm very, but from today, I am very proud Iraqi.
So what can JSOCs and Jewish student communities learn from the Board of Deputies' report into inclusion?
Well, first of all, you should read the report. And I'll be very delighted to give you a report, not just the report itself, but what we have done in the Board of Deputies. And you'll see there, for example, that we have broken the progress into three: short, medium, and long term. And the short term is start 30th of November, is next week, exactly next week. It's the day that the Knesset decreed to be the day of commemorates the displacement of Sephardi communities from their countries of origin. Let's make sure that every JSOC, the same way as every consulate and in Israeli consulate in the whole world, commemorate that day. Let's make sure that every JSOC does that. And then you will find, okay, so if you do an event, you'll then look for the guy who comes in from that part of the world, and the mother and father or grandfather, that then becomes his way of finding out about his own roots and feeling responsible to tell you about it, and to tell you the same way as I'm telling my story. I'm feeling very happy that it's being recorded and somebody will hear it in a year or 10, and therefore that gives me the same pride as I have. The same guy will have the same thing. And you come from wonderful families, guy, yourself. And I think that you have a lot to tell about that story. And that story has to be the same way as my children took on the history of European Jewry and go to Auschwitz and go to Poland several times. And my daughter actually take groups there and guide them the same way as we took on that. I hope that the wider mainstream Jewish community take on our history as part of the Jewish history.
So I think your story is particularly unique because having left Baghdad in 1971, you went back quite recently. What made you want to go back to Baghdad?
In the 80s, when I started being comfortable and I started working, I was asked to tell this story, and somebody, very well-known person, said to me, "This is fascinating. I didn't know there were Jews in Iraq." And that really shook me till today when I remember that sentence. And I said, not in my lifetime. Another person should ask this question as long as I am there. And as long as I witnessed what it is to be there, and what an incredible life my ancestors and your ancestors had. They wrote the Talmud there. They opened the first two universities, the same as Cambridge and Oxford, Surah and Pumbedita. 1,000 years before the Oxbridge, it was in Babylon. And all these built civilization, all that should not be forgotten and should be there. So as a result, I embedded myself in the Iraqi Arabs, Iraqi Christians, and said, I am also Iraqi as you are, and more so. I am 1,200 years before you arrived to Iraq. I was there. And so that led to me being involved with the Iraqi opposition. And in 2003, when the Saddam regime fell, I found myself in the very first people who actually was there. I was petrified, but I longed to be there. I longed to go and say, this was my school. This was the cemetery that my grandfather is buried. This is my house. Because when we left like dusk time. We left like criminals. We left with forged papers. We ran away. And it's like, why? Why am I running away from a country that I have been here for and I contributed so much to?
What was it like going back to Baghdad and being there again after 30, 40 years?
Incredibly emotional. Incredibly, I was reliving history by walking from places that I still remember and trying to find, was that my barber? Was that the hotel? Oh my God, is this the restaurant we ate? And slowly I found, until I found my home, and the one I grew up with. And I was blessed with being part of a documentary called Remember Baghdad, which I urge you to see. It's on Netflix. And in that documentary, I'm looking for the home I grew up with, and I am going around in an Arab taxi trying to find it, could not. And then I said to him, "Take me back to the synagogue." And he took me back to the synagogue, and then I closed my eyes and I said, right, here when I was so many years old, my father would hold my hand. I would leave the house and I said, take right now, take left, take this one. It's like, right, it's one of those two. And that you can't buy that experience. And there it was, my home, a home that I grew up in. And as it happened, it was locked and padlocked. It's a beautiful scene in the Netflix of me sitting there and looking at that padlocked door and looking at the trees of particular fruit that grew in Iraq and the gardens that we used to play. And yes, I thought, you know what, you're destined to be there. And I went from there. I've been going regularly there, and I went to see every single biblical shrine. There are 6 prophets buried in Iraq, and I've seen it from north and to south, and I felt, yes, I felt I'm a witness. I'm a witness to the life we lived, and I'm able to push my narrative into coming here and talking about it. That's one more generation.
And what was the reaction to your documentary when it was released?
Mixed. Everybody loved it, including, as I said, including all the non-Jews who watch it. Tens of thousands who contact us. Tens of thousands. Even today, after the documentary was premiered in 2017, and even today, I wake up in the morning and there's like 3 or 4 messages, people saying, "Just watch your documentary, looked for you. What an incredible thing! My mother is non-Jews," and but the controversial part was me deciding to buy a house in Iraq, and I did. And people found that strange and bizarre, that having escaped and having had all the experiences, that actually go back and buy a house in Iraq. And so normally now, when I show the documentary, before they ask me that question, I actually answer it and says, right, before we start the Q&A, this is an answer for this, for why I bought a house. Now you can ask me other questions.
So why did you buy a house?
Okay, so I was interviewed 4 times for the BBC when we had premiered this documentary, including current affairs, which is 30 minutes sum up of the world current affairs. And even then, they interviewed me. So the interviewer said to me, "Can I ask you something off the record, Mr. Shuker?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Did you really buy a house?" I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "But I know Iraq. This is not the time to buy a real estate in Iraq now." So I said, "Can I ask you a question off the record?" He said, "Sure." I said, "Would you have interviewed me if I didn't buy a house?" And there lies your answer. It's the sensational act of establishing my roots again and saying, I'm going nowhere. I'm here because this is where my prophets and my grandfather is buried and all that sort of thing. Is that sensational part that made the documentary something that worth watching and worth watching, not just by Jews, but for any person who run away from his home, and anyone who this one, and this longing to recover what was broken.
Incredible. I think that's all we have time for, but if we could wrap up with a few quick fire questions, that would be amazing. So firstly, very quickly, who's your biggest role model?
My sister Linda, without a shadow of a doubt. She was an inspiration. She passed away. She's younger than me, but she inspired many people, and I daily was inspired by her action and by her thoughts and the way she faced her cancer, which finished her off, was an inspiration forever.
Amazing. And your favorite Jewish festival?
Jewish actor?
Jewish festival.
My favorite Jewish festival is Pesach, without a shadow of a doubt. Love the story and love telling it, and just enjoy the Agadah, enjoy the 2 nights very much.
And very lastly, what's your favorite Iraqi food?
That I cannot answer with one word. Everything that Mum's cooks are my favorite food.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for coming today, Edwin, and for telling us about your life growing up in Baghdad, about coming to the UK as a refugee, and your work at the Border Deputies, and going back to Baghdad afterwards. It's an incredible story. And of course, throughout all of this month, we've been very grateful to work with JSOCs, with the Border Deputies, to run Sephardi and Mizrahi Heritage and Awareness Month. It's an incredible project, which I really encourage JSOCs and Jewish students to get involved with, to share the Iraqi Jewish story, and to make sure that voices such as Edwin's are amplified as they should be. So thank you very much, Edwin.
If we can be of any assistance in any JSOC, whoever they want a testimony, an eyewitness, somebody who lived there, we are there for them.
Thank you. And
Thank you.